One administration agreed to and the other completed a full withdrawal of U.S. troops without securing the release of a Navy veteran held captive by the Taliban. Mark Frerichs was abducted just as the Trump administration was in the final stages of reaching an agreement with the Taliban to pull all U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. On the day that Mark Frerichs vanished, he was on his way to a meeting about a new construction project in Kabul. A 57-year-old Navy veteran and a skilled engineer, carpenter, electrician, and mechanic from suburban Chicago, he had been living in Kabul for roughly 10 years, moving from job to job doing what he saw as his part to build a new Afghanistan. His sister Charlene described him as the type who could fix your roof, car, or dishwasher. In Illinois, he would turn lumber that he picked up from construction sites into custom furniture for his family: desks, dressers, shelving units. In the 1990s, he built an elaborate tree house for his niece and nephew, complete with a dumbwaiter to haul up supplies. Charlene at times struggled to understand why her brother chose to work in Afghanistan. "I would say, why are you rebuilding? All they're going to do is blow it up again." "Well," Mark told her, "then I'll rebuild it again." In Kabul, he often lived on job sites in temporary worker housing, side by side with Afghans, rarely with other foreigners. When Charlene saw him on their periodic video chats, he seemed happy, eager to share his latest accomplishments: the rebuilt office, the fixed generator, the new water project. He was proud that he was out there helping them, doing his part, she told me. When the siblings were last in contact, on January 28, 2020, all seemed well in Mark's Kabul. Though they rarely discussed the war, he told her that he didn't want to make her nervous. News at the time included a Taliban offer to reduce violence ahead of the next round of peace talks with Trump administration officials. He was doing magic tricks, a favorite hobby for Frerichs since childhood. Earlier in his travels, he had bought a pair of white doves, which, in one video that he sent home, he casually conjured from a scarf around his neck, his face beaming a magician's knowing smile. "He seemed settled into life there, so I kind of let my guard down," Charlene recalled. Frerichs knew that life in Kabul included risks. Before arriving in Afghanistan, he had done similar work in Iraq for more than a year. He was diligent about signing emails with coded initials below the signature line, so that Charlene would see it was him and not an imposter using his account. On January 31, she received the first email from him with no initials. The message consisted of one cryptic text fragment: "A case of the missing mother." 2 days later, Groundhog Day, 2 local Lombard, Illinois, police officers and 2 FBI agents knocked on her door. Almost every day for the next 2 weeks, the FBI would be at her house. The previous day, Frerichs had been abducted in Kabul. He was smuggled out of the capital and likely taken across the Afghanistan-Pakistan border into the tribal areas of western Pakistan, a mountainous region that has served as a Taliban haven since 2001. For more than a decade, it's where the Taliban have held their highest value hostages, inside the borders of America's purported ally, where the U.S. military is prohibited from operating. Frerichs is being held by the Haqqani Network, the Taliban-affiliated, mafia-esque criminal syndicate founded by Jalaluddin Haqqani, the late Mujahideen leader cultivated by the CIA during the Soviet war in Afghanistan. For years, the Haqqani network has been the Taliban's most capable and ruthless faction, responsible for carrying out many of the war's bloodiest attacks and running a lucrative kidnap for ransom business. The timing of Frerichs's abduction was not incidental. He was abducted just as the Trump administration was in the final stages of reaching an agreement with the Taliban to pull all U.S. troops out of Afghanistan, and at a moment when the Haqqanis appeared to have recently run out of American hostages. 3 months before Frerichs's kidnapping, in November 2019, President Trump approved one of the war's most controversial prisoner swaps. In a deal that sparked protests in the streets of the Afghan capital, the Haqqanis released Kevin King and Timothy Weeks, American and Australian professors taken at gunpoint outside the American University in Kabul in August 2016, and 10 Afghan soldiers. In exchange, the Afghan government, under pressure from Trump's State Department, released 3 high-ranking Haqqani commanders, responsible for terrorizing the city with years of car bombings and assassinations. They included Anas Haqqani, who, along with other commanders from the group, is now in charge of security in the Afghan capital. On Tuesday, the Taliban announced an interim government with Sirajuddin Haqqani, the network's commander and AU's designated terrorist since 2012, serving as interior minister and overseeing law enforcement nationwide. Christopher Miller, an Army veteran and the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center who served as Trump's final Secretary of Defense, supported the exchange for King and Weeks. Trump was not the first U.S. president to make a deal with the Haqqanis. In 2014, the Obama administration released 5 high-ranking Taliban prisoners from the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center in exchange for the U.S. Army soldier Bowie Bergdahl, whom the Haqqanis had held in Pakistan for 5 years. End of wars always come down to prisoner negotiations, Miller told me. They always do, since time immemorial. As the Taliban neared their agreement with the Trump administration, he explained, they needed another bargaining chip back home. The Haqqanis had to restock, Miller told me. It was really bad timing for Mark. Frerichs's sister Charlene hoped that the Trump administration would negotiate with the Taliban for her brother's release. The talks in Doha had been ongoing for months. 4 weeks after Frerichs's kidnapping, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Trump's Afghan peace envoy, Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation Zalmay Khalilzad, met with Taliban leaders in Qatar to formalize an agreement on the U.S. military withdrawal from Afghanistan. In a move that was harshly criticized, Pompeo and Khalilzad relinquished the most significant leverage that the Trump administration held, the presence of U.S. ground troops, without securing a broad peace agreement in the country. Khalilzad declined requests for an interview. On February 29, 2020, in an elaborate ceremony in the Doha Sheraton, the agreement for bringing peace to Afghanistan was signed by Khalilzad and Taliban leaders, culminating 9 rounds of talks. The agreement included freeing up to 5,000 Taliban prisoners in Afghanistan, but made no mention of the new American hostage. Former Trump administration officials told me that Frerichs was seen as a distraction. Zal and Pompeo were so eager to get a peace deal signed, they wanted to not deal with the fact that a U.S. hostage had just been taken a month earlier, a former senior administration official told me. Congressman Mike Waltz, a former Green Beret and a Republican from Jacksonville, Florida, agreed. I don't think we ever should have signed that deal, he said. Not just because they were holding a hostage, but because they took him just in the few weeks prior. Miller, Trump's former defense secretary, also criticized Khalilzad. Zal is always the smartest guy in the room, a modern-day Henry Kissinger, Miller said. He didn't really give a shit. After the Trump administration signed its accord with the Taliban, Charlene and her husband, Chris Kokora, tried to speak with Khalilzad. Though they had been assigned a government support team soon after Mark's kidnapping, none of their contacts at the FBI or the State Department could outline the government's plan to bring him home. Every line of inquiry seemed to end with Khalilzad, the only official speaking directly with the Taliban. I felt that he needed to explain to me why he signed that peace deal knowing that my brother was being held captive, Charlene said. Khalilzad's office scheduled their first call for April 29, 2020, 88 days after the kidnapping. It didn't go well. According to Charlene and her husband, Khalilzad repeatedly referred to Mark as Paul, confusing Frerichs with Paul Overby, a septuagenarian American writer who had disappeared in 2014 and was believed to have died in captivity. After the fourth or fifth slip-up, Chris interrupted Khalilzad. "Do you even know who the hell you're talking to?" he asked. The following week, Khalilzad stated publicly for the first time, via Twitter, that he had raised Frerichs's name in Doha, prompting the Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen to deny that the group held him at all. Following a second inconclusive call with Khalilzad and a flurry of press reports on their brother's plight and the government's inaction, Charlene and Chris requested to speak with President Trump. On June 11, the White House declined. 2 weeks later, on June 29, Pompeo held a virtual meeting with the Taliban leadership, who wanted to discuss prisoner exchanges. Since the first secret meetings between Obama administration and Taliban officials in Germany, in 2011, the freeing of Taliban prisoners had been, along with U.S. troop withdrawal, a topmost concern of the insurgent group. The Taliban's lead delegate, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, who was jailed for 8 years in Pakistan before the State Department lobbied for his release in 2018, made a proposal to Pompeo. Baradar, who is now the acting Deputy Prime Minister of Afghanistan, called for Talibs to be freed from military detention in Guantanamo. He also asked for the release of a specific Afghan serving a life sentence in federal prison for drug trafficking, a tribal leader whose freedom the Taliban had requested for years, Haji Bashir Noorzai. Before 9/11, Noorzai was one of the richest men in Afghanistan, a leader of an influential southern Pashtun tribe, and a savvy third-generation opium trader. In the early 1990s, he briefly worked as an informant for the Drug Enforcement Agency and the CIA, which, he later testified in court, paid him $50,000 for tracking down some of the missing Stinger missiles that the agency had dispersed among the anti-Soviet Mujahideen. As the Taliban rose to power in the late 90s, Noorzai served as a key financier for Mullah Omar's movement. The Sheldon Adelson of the Taliban, Barnett Rubin, an Afghanistan scholar and former senior State Department advisor in the Obama administration, told me. Following 9/11, Noorzai flipped to the Americans and again volunteered as an informant. He turned over more than a dozen truckloads of heavy Taliban weapons. But after a U.S. raid killed one of his closest mentors, a tribal elder who also backed the Americans, Noorzai fled with his family to Pakistan.